All right, so we might get started. First of all, this is the first time I've used Google Meet in a present mode, so if we have some technical glitches, apologies. But yeah, a really warm welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for joining to the official launch of Butterfly Fish Foundation. It's fantastic to have you here and officially launch the foundation, or BFF as we'll call it for short, as we go through today. In short, what BFF aims to do is to connect people and organisations to raise awareness for oceans and mobilise collaborative and coordinated action for greater impact. Today, Jack and I will take you through BFF's purpose and vision. We'll also explore some of the amazing work that's being done for oceans right now, and we are stoked to have three guest speakers, Julie and Tanya, who will talk about their own work. So first, before exploring Butterfly Fish Foundation, we thought we'd introduce ourselves. So my name's Amy Sparks, and I'm an Associate Director at Deloitte. I work predominantly in the climate and ESG space, helping organisations with their decision-making around all things climate and ESG. For those who don't know, ESG stands for environmental, social and governance considerations. I have a background in financial services, but I've always been intrigued by the connection between our world and everything that's in it and business. My connection to the ocean is really with a love for coral reefs and their inhabitants. When I was a young girl, I lived in Samoa for 3 years, and I was lucky enough to live on a lagoon just on the outskirts of Apia, and every day after I would snorkel. I was completely obsessed with butterfly fish. And so that's the inspiration, the simple inspiration behind the name. When I came up with the idea for Butterfly Fish Foundation, I was determined that this would not be a me thing, largely because I'm not a marine biologist, I work in finance. But I brought along a colleague and friend I met through work, Jack, and wrote him in.
Hi everyone, I'm Jack, analyst at Deloitte. I've been part of Deloitte's Operation and Transformation team now for just over a year. Before that, I was studying down at the University of Canterbury, where I received my bachelor's degree and co-founded 2 startup companies, both of which were heavily linked to sustainability. This is when my sustainability focus began. And now you might think it's a bit of a cliche hearing people say Seaspiracy or game changers made me change my lifestyle, and it is. But for me, it was Woody Harrelson in Kiss the Ground, which if you haven't seen, is about sustainable agriculture and food production. I love all things sustainability, and while the ocean, I'm actually pretty sure the ocean hates me. I get deathly seasick, and I'm the only person I know who's fallen off a boat in dry dock. I'm pretty keen to protect our waters and to ensure that they continue to provide for generations to come and potentially be used as the natural climate solution. So today we'll be introducing what the Butterfly Fish Foundation is, and then we're going to be hearing from 3 of our guest speakers, and then we'll run through how you guys can get involved moving forward. So where did it all begin, and what does the Butterfly Fish Foundation aim to do?
Thanks, Jack. So to take it right to the beginning, so in September last year, I was fortunate enough to attend a conference in Manchester called One Young World with 3,000 others from over 280 countries. This conference, which happens every year, is meant to inspire positive impact with young people. And last year, the 5 challenges included oceans. It was at One Young World where I had the idea of Butterfly Fish Foundation. What became abundantly clear to me when learning about ocean work in that setting through the speakers and talking to people from all around the world, including in the Pacific, who work every day to raise awareness and better our oceans, was 2 main points. And the first was that there's still a need for oceans awareness. The second was that organisations working for oceans are disparate and need profile. And so on screen there, I've sort of we've thought about and bullet pointed a few of those points that really expand on those 2 main realizations. And what that idea really developed into was to create some sort of organization that had not only an awareness objective, but to build a community and enable those working in the space.
So in one sentence, the Butterfly Fish Foundation is all about connecting people and organisations in order to raise awareness for oceans and mobilise collaborative and coordinated action for greater impact. And we've broken that down into two main pillars. The first being awareness raising, and the second, build and enable a community.
Right, and so if we unpack these a little bit further, we can talk to what we want to achieve. So under Pillar 1, we aim to launch an awareness raising program probably later this year. And this will have an education focus and aim to have sign-ups or people and organisations who will sign up and commit to being Ocean BFFs, which stands for Best Friends Forever, but is also conveniently the acronym for Butterfly Fish Foundation. So we need support for this, and we're looking to develop this out later this year. Secondly, we want to build and enable a community. We will run webinars similar to this, and community of practice sessions that are invite-only spaces for people who are working in or wanting to work in areas best suited to the topic. We're also looking to facilitate and actively take part in projects. We want to use our connections in the private sector and leverage skill sets across non-oceans organisations and bring them to oceans projects. We will also look to report on the impact that we're having. This is an example of some of the different engagement and collaboration spaces we will look to host. A community of practice for plastic waste, for example, a project pitch space where those working for oceans can share with the community their ideas and projects and get the support that they need. And once we've launched the awareness raising campaign, it's a call to update on our progress or our Best Friend Ocean BFFs, which will supplement our impact reporting. BFF aligns with 9 SDGs, and we'll look to align our impact with these and use this lens to focus our work. So obviously this was a really high level spin through of the Butterfly Fish Foundation, and as this is a launch, it's still obviously early days. The purpose of today was really to give an introduction, to be really clear around our 2 main pillars of work, and following our guest speakers, we'll inform you on how you can get involved. So now it is a great pleasure to move to our 3 guest speakers today. So our guest speakers will speak to the work that they're doing for oceans. Speakers may reflect on the challenges that ocean work faces and what is needed to bring solutions to those challenges. We're unlikely to have time today for questions, but if you do want to send any through, you can use the chat function, although don't ask me directly how to use it, or you can send through to our email after the webinar, and we'd be happy to follow those up with the right people or right speakers. So first up, we have Dr. Julie Hall. So Julie is the director of the Sustainable Seas National Science Challenge. She has extensive experience in biological oceanography, leading large multidisciplinary research projects, and in the management of people and projects. Her scientific background is in food web dynamics in both marine and freshwater ecosystems, with a special interest in microbial food webs. So welcome, Julie, and I'm just going to stop sharing so that you can share your screen.
Well, thank you very much, Amy, for the introduction and inviting me to be here today. I've been asked to give an overview of the Sustainable Seas National Science Challenge. It's one of 11 national science challenges in New Zealand. They were set up in 2014 to provide research on key topics that were a priority for New Zealand. And I think all of us here today would agree that improving the management of our marine resources is a priority. So let's have a think about the reality of managing our marine environment at the moment. And we can see that there's activities within the water. So you've got fishing, you've got aquaculture, ports, oil and gas, etc. But you've also got the impacts from the land. So you've got sedimentation, you've got nutrients, etc., all coming into the marine environment. And that's at the sort of local to national scale. If we add to that what's happening globally, we're getting increase in sea temperatures, and we've certainly had a number of marine heat waves around New Zealand that have had significant impacts in the last 2 years. And we're also seeing a reduction in the acidity of the ocean because of the CO2 going into the ocean, which is going to have impacts on marine life, particularly shellfish and their life cycles. So those are the sorts of things that we're facing in terms of managing our marine environment. Now, each of the science challenges was given an objective, and ours, I think, poorly worded, but gets across the point, to enhance the utilisation of marine resources within environmental and biological limits. So there's an economic and an environmental imperative to the research that we're doing. And that's reflected here. So we need to have healthy ecosystems to support a blue economy. And at the centre of that is ecosystem-based management. And the challenge is undertaking research to move us from the way we're managing our marine environment at the moment, which is very based on an individual activity, a resource consent for aquaculture or a port, our fishing is all managed separately. We need to be able to bring that together and think about these things in a holistic way. And we need to start thinking about a blue economy. Now, many of you will think about blue economy as commercial activities done in the marine environment. We think about it quite differently. And when we're talking about blue economy activities, we're talking about activities that generate economic value, but also contribute socially, culturally, and environmentally to the marine environment and the livelihoods and people surrounding that environment. So it's quite a different take on the blue economy. So the challenge is bringing that together with ecosystem-based management. When we look at the long-term outcomes we're looking for improved health of our seas, and I think we all know we've got degraded marine ecosystems around New Zealand. We're looking to enhance the blue economy. We're looking to empower mana moana, which is very uniquely New Zealand, and to improve decision making using an ecosystem-based management approach. Ooh, don't know why that happened. Okay, so what do we mean by ecosystem-based management? Holistic, inclusive way of managing the marine environment, competing uses and demands, and the way we value the marine environment. Well, it can sort of mean a lot of things to a lot of people. So around that, we identified a set of principles, and that's based on international literature and also making those principles uniquely New Zealand. So starting with co-governance, so that's uniquely New Zealand, so providing for the treaty and also tikanga and mataranga Māori. Using collaborative decision-making processes that's participatory and involving interested parties. Needs to be sustainable in terms of our marine environment and the uses of it. And we're looking at that at intergenerational timescales, not today, tomorrow, 10 years from now, but intergenerational. That our management is knowledge-based, and that is bringing science and mataranga Māori knowledge to the table to be involved and used as a basis for decision-making. That the decision-making is adaptive, so decisions are made, appropriate monitoring can be undertaken, acknowledging uncertainty because we will never know everything about, to be able to make decisions that will last a lifetime. So we can revisit those decisions. It's also really important to bring human activities into the thinking. There's a tendency to say the ocean's out there and we're here. We are part of that system along with our multiple uses as our values from it. So it takes a change in thinking about how we think about our relationship with the ocean. And importantly, that it is tailored, and it's tailored to place, to time, recognising the ecosystems in that place, how they're connected, and also addressing cumulative and multiple stresses of those ecosystems. What's really important about ecosystem-based management is it's not a tick box exercise. It is a journey as we move from the management we have now through to an ecosystem-based management approach, and it will look different in different places. It's tailored to time and place, to the values of the community, the knowledge that we have on that system. So it's not a one-stop fits all. It needs to be tailored to place. So that's where we're coming from, just to give you an idea of the challenge. 10-year program, we've got over 300 researchers from 65 organisations. We've got 75 research projects, and what's really important is not only we have the research projects, but we draw that information together. And the challenge finishes in June 2024, so we're in the process of synthesising material coming out of the projects to make it greater the sum of the parts. Another really important part of the challenge is this is just not researchers. It is co-development partners, and we've got over 200 co-development partners, different iwi, Māori organisations, regional and central government, industry, community groups have all been part of co-developing our strategies, our projects, and also the outputs from our projects. So just to give you an idea of the types of research that we're doing and the focus of our research at the moment. So we've been looking at degradation and recovery of marine ecosystems, and that's really focused around cumulative effects. Now, cumulative effects either is a contaminant or an impact that is happening over time, or it's a number of different stresses that are all acting at the same time. So it might be increase in nutrients, sedimentation, and ocean temperature as an example. At the moment, we don't manage for cumulative effects. We manage for things individually, which is causing some of the problems and degradation of our marine environment. And how do we take that knowledge and use it effectively in marine management? In terms of the blue economy, we're looking at what we're doing in the marine economy, what we could do to change that, to move businesses from being businesses in the marine environment to a blue economy environment. Marine tourism, can we build a seaweed sector in New Zealand with aquaculture? We've done some innovative work around extracts from both seaweed and marine algae to take chemicals out of those. Can they be used to make less impactful sunscreens? Because we know a lot of sunscreens are impacting the marine environment. Also got a project looking at how can we fund restoration in the marine environment, and I did notice Nigel Bradley came into the webinar today. He's leading that restorative marine economies project. One of the things that our co-development partners raised quite early on was the issues of risk and uncertainty in decision making, and it really makes decision making difficult and brings about a lot of arguments and different perspectives. So really developing an understanding of the perceptions of risk and uncertainty. People come from different backgrounds, from different knowledge bases. Their perceptions of risk and uncertainty are different. Understanding those differences helps us understand different points of view, helps us in clearer and better decision making. So how do we communicate that risk and uncertainty? And really important to be taking it from environmental uncertainty. And if we think about impacts of climate change, we're seeing a lot of variability in our environment, and how does that actually go through and impact businesses, and how does it impact investment from banks into businesses? So moving across the different areas of research. Something I didn't say before is this is all interdisciplinary research. We have researchers, we have biophysical researchers, science researchers, economists, social scientists, lawyers, experts in policy, Mataranga Māori, Tikanga Māori. So we're bringing all of those skills together. It's also important if we want to move the New Zealand management system to ecosystem-based management, looking at the legislation and regulation and seeing how we might be able to do that. And in New Zealand, we've got about 26, 27 different pieces of legislation that are used to manage the marine environment, which makes it an incredibly complex space. So some of the things we're looking at is how the treaty relationships and treaty settlements could relate to ecosystem-based management, making sure there's a good connection there. How could we do ecosystem-based management with the current policy and legislation? So the Fisheries Act, the Resource Management Act, but also looking forward into, particularly at the moment, the reform of the Resource Management Act. So we've been submitting to that and making sure the science we're doing is going through into the drafting of that legislation. And it's also really important in the challenge to be making sure that we're bringing through tikanga Māori. So can we bring kaitiakitanga for the marine environment and ecosystem-based management together? How might they complement each other to make a unique management system for New Zealand? We have a number of Māori-led and initiated projects. Some examples of that is in the Ahiwa Harbour, looking at enacting kaitiakitanga and EBM together. That's bringing together iwi, marine biology researchers, district and regional councils to improve the management of Ahiwa Harbour. Can we bring maramataka, so knowledge of the Māori lunar calendar, into marine management? How could that improve our marine management? And we've also been looking at going the other way. How can we make the science and research that we've been undertaking available to kaitiaki so that they have a wider knowledge base in the decision making they're making in their local area? Also important to be looking at how we would do EBM in the real world. We've had a regional study in Hawke's Bay. We've got one underway at the moment looking at ecosystem-based shellfish management in the Marlborough Sounds, and we're also working with Fisheries New Zealand on ecosystem-based fisheries management in the Hauraki Gulf. So that's some examples of actually getting out there and applying the research. I've talked a lot about the research, but what's really, really important for the challenges is that the research is not locked up in research papers, not accessible, not used. What we're looking at for is to take that that knowledge and turn it into impact. And we've been involved in a number of things, as I mentioned, the RMA reform, revising the environmental reporting for the marine environment in New Zealand, habitats of significance in the marine environment, the work we've been doing with Māori in the marine environment. We've had central government agencies coming to us saying, how do we do this? What material have you got? How can you help us in this? And what's been really important there is that our co-development partners have been working with us to co-design the tools that come out of our research to make sure that we're getting impact. They're fit for purpose and accessible. So that gives you a really quick overview of the Sustainable Seas National Science Challenge. For those of you who are interested to have a little bit of a look at what in more detail of what we've been doing, there's our website. You can sign up for our newsletter. It comes out about once every 2 months, so it won't fill up your inbox. If you're on social media, you may have already seen us. We do post regularly to social media. A back catalogue of webinars on our research is available on our YouTube site. And for anybody who's working in the education field, we have partnered with Learns, which is an organisation that provides virtual field trips for school children, and we've done a number of those as well. And they're available at that website. So that is all from me.
Awesome.
A very quick tour of the Science Challenge.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. That was great. I loved hearing about the ecosystem-based management and particularly how it's been implemented today in New Zealand. So thank you. Thanks for sharing. And now we'll shift on to our second speaker here, Finn Ross. I have the pleasure of welcoming Finn. Finn's a passionate young Kiwi naturalist, climate activist and adventurer. He's a Deakin University PhD candidate, UC Honours alumni, and a Provost Scholarship recipient to the University of California, Davis, where he studied wildlife, fish, and conservation biology. Finn's PhD is investigating seaweed as a natural climate solution, and he's on the scientific advisory board to the Kelp Forest Foundation. He's held roles as the co-founder for non-profit charity Let Them Fish, the founder of the Seaweed Solution, Bomb Butcher, and the contributor to the genius of Live Ocean. He's currently the founder of Carbon Z, the host of the Both Sides Now political podcast, and the co-chair of the Future Farmers New Zealand. And when he's not in the hills or the water, you can find him on Lake Hawea Station, his family farm, which is pioneering on-farm environmentalism and is the first carbon zero certified farm in Australasia. I'll now pass over to Finn to talk more about his work. Thank you, Finn.
Cool. Thanks, Jack. Kia ora, everyone. Good to be with you all today. And yeah, Jack and Amy, thanks very much for having me. I'm going to briefly share some of my personal reflections on my perspective of the size of the challenge we're facing as a young climate scientist, and then discuss some of the solutions we can look to the ocean for. And then finally finish by just briefly discussing marine geoengineering, which is a conversation I think everyone in this community should be increasingly across in the coming years. I'm sure everyone here is aware of the enormity of challenges that we are facing with our ocean. Close to home, we have the Hauraki Gulf, which has really been a complete failure, an ecosystem pushed over the brink with few signs of bouncing back. When I first went to a Gulf forum in my last year of school in 2016, I was full of optimism that something would change, yet somehow things are still getting worse on our back doorstep in Auckland. I was lucky enough to spend time, quite a bit of time growing up in Tonga with my granddad, who was vanilla farming up there. The coral bleaching is catastrophic, and for me, this is almost the greatest challenge, the greatest tragedy of our time. We've destroyed over 50% of global coral reefs, and are still going about our daily business as society really just drives off a cliff for catastrophic global climate change. And last, I think the thing that really frightens me the most, and is a really difficult one to get your head around the enormity of it, is the global feedback loops that come from climate change. The idea that warming triggers more warming. And with the ocean, this mainly comes from reducing the sea ice area and the slowing of deep sea ocean currents that are bringing cold water to the surface. And those are the couple of things that really keep me awake at night, and I guess inspire me to action on the pessimistic side, and then on the other side of the things, I guess, are my deep passion and love for the ocean and surfing and freediving. I think overall we need wartime efforts to address the challenges our ocean is facing. The status quo is just not nearly good enough. We need radical societal transformation to address the sustainability challenges we're collectively facing, and in particular those affecting our ocean. One of the efforts needs to be on blue carbon, which is the solution that I spend most of my time working on. Blue carbon is typically associated with mangroves, seagrasses, and salt marshes, which are coastal marine vegetation ecosystems, which collectively, restoring those ecosystems globally could sequester 3% of global emissions by 2030, with significant co-benefits around community biodiversity and storm protection. It's great timing because actually just on this weekend just gone, I submitted a paper which hopefully, when published in a few months' time, will be New Zealand's first estimate of our blue carbon contribution in New Zealand. So I thought I would just share those first couple of high-level stats with the group out of interest. The total area we estimated in New Zealand that we currently have in blue carbon ecosystems is 76,000 hectares, which is 1% of the area for terrestrial native forests. We also estimated New Zealand's current blue carbon stock is 4.7 million tonnes of carbon, so not CO2, but carbon, with a current carbon sequestration rate of 150,000 tonnes of CO2 per year, which is equivalent to 0.2% of New Zealand's total gross emissions. Salt marshes have possibly the most potential for increased blue carbon from restoration. Mangroves are naturally expanding in northern New Zealand at around 2 to 3% per year, and seagrasses in New Zealand our restoration techniques and carbon sequestration estimates for seagrass habitats are still super preliminary. And overall, I think developing a national framework for blue carbon restoration, protection and monitoring in New Zealand is super important as part of New Zealand's ongoing climate change mitigation and adaptation estimates. But those three ecosystems, which are sort of the most well-known blue carbon habitats, don't include seaweed, which is what my PhD's on. And New Zealand, if you think about the New Zealand coastline, most of it is rocky coastal habitat, which is seaweed. And seaweed has a huge portion of New Zealand has a huge portion of the global seaweed or kelp biome, with massive seaweed diversity, over 900 species. Seaweed is a bit of a hype topic in the climate change space. There's a lot of conversations happening globally on the opportunities for seaweed. And I just want to distill those into sort of 4 key categories. The first is wild seaweed forest restoration. So in New Zealand, we've had a lot of underwater, I sort of refer to them as forest fires when I'm talking about them to people. We've obviously had these Australian bushfires on land, which was super significant. Tasmania had similar sort of scale of bushfires, but underwater with the kelp forest die-off. And New Zealand's had a lot of kelp forest die-off as well. Not to the same extent as Tasmania, but it's still been pretty significant. So the opportunity to restore wild seaweed forests might have climate change mitigation co-benefits, and particularly in the Gulf, as we've seen with all the Kinder Barrens, there's opportunities to restore seaweed forests there. And that's possibly the biggest and most relevant one for New Zealand in the immediate future. But there's still a lot of challenges for actually accounting for that. And it seems like in the next 5 to 10 years that we won't be able to account for the carbon sequestration that's happening from restoring wild seaweed forests with any accuracy. And that's just because as seaweed grows, it's fixing that carbon into the biomass, but it breaks down really quickly before that carbon actually gets to a deep sea sink site. So you can imagine seaweed's growing super, super fast, locking in all that carbon into its biomass. But it's fragmenting and dissolving into the ocean before it gets into a deep sea sink site. There's some great research being done in New Zealand on quantifying that, but it's still a while away before we have those tools. So that's part one. Part two is, as Julie sort of mentioned, is the potential for expansion of seaweed aquaculture in New Zealand, which I think there's a few people on this call who are also really interested in. And there's two opportunities there. One is as seaweed's growing on seaweed farms, it's shedding carbon, and that some of that carbon might get into long-term sink sites, either in sediment directly below the farm or as it's been exported from the farm site. And the third one, which is really relevant, I think, for New Zealand, is the opportunity for emission abatement from seaweed aquaculture products. So things like biofuel, bioplastics, nutraceuticals, pharmaceuticals. They could be low carbon or even climate positive products that we're getting from seaweed aquaculture that displace other products on land. So for example, fertilizer, we're getting our fertilizers from seaweed aquaculture. They could be displacing high emitting fertilizers like urea, like nitrogen fertilizer in agriculture. So those are the first 3 ways, and the last way, which was a paper I published last year, is this idea of growing seaweed and sinking it specifically in the deeps, in the deep ocean as a carbon sink, which is a relatively controversial solution called ocean afforestation, where we're growing seaweed biomass and sinking it into the deep sea, and it seems like there's a lot of challenges with the carbon accounting there. So those are sort of the 4 ways seaweed can have climate change mitigation benefits. But yeah, I think that the immediate opportunity there is for the emission abatement opportunities from new seaweed products, which is the one that I'm most excited about. But conscious of time, I could talk about seaweed for hours. There's a lot of opportunities in New Zealand, I think, for seaweed that a lot of people on this call are interested in and really interested in that conversation if anyone wants to pick that up with me later. But just the last point I thought I'd touch on is marine geoengineering. We don't really have anyone in New Zealand who's researching marine geoengineering. For those of you who don't know, it's man-made, large-scale interventions in the climate system, and the main 3 marine approaches that I think have some sort of promise are ocean alkalinity, which is this idea of adding rock or lime into the ocean that changes ocean alkalinity. Is some really complex chemistry, but allows the ocean to absorb more carbon. 2 is cloud seeding, where we're spraying water vapor into the air from the oceans which are creating more clouds, which reflects more sunlight. And third is something called microbubbles, which is a pretty funny one, but it's the process of creating a bunch of bubbles across the surface of the ocean, which increases the reflectivity of the ocean. So I'm definitely not an advocate for doing marine geoengineering, but I think New Zealand, because we've got the 4th largest EEZ in the world, and the global conversation on geoengineering is heating up, particularly marine geoengineering, we should be really aware of a lot of the conversations that are happening in the marine geoengineering space in New Zealand. And yeah, my approach is definitely not, let's do marine geoengineering, but let's have the updated scientific discussion in New Zealand on the risks and the possible benefits. So yeah, thanks everyone. Really excited to see the next steps for the Butterfly Fish Foundation. We've got a hell of a lot of work to do in the ocean conservation space in NZ, and I think New Zealand's got a real opportunity to be a global leader in this space. So it's great to have a forum like this to be able to discuss these big issues.
Awesome. Thank you, Finn. That was great. Great to finally see some direct research for New Zealand, particularly in the blue carbon and geoengineering. That's great to hear. Thank you. And now we'll shift on to our third and final speaker, Tanya. So we have Tanya Murphy. She's based in North Queensland, Australia, and has been working in marine conservation for many years, as well as being a dive and snorkel guide at the GBR. Joining us today to talk about the Australian Marine Conservation Society and the Fight for Our Reef Foundation is Tanya. So thank you, Tanya.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Kia ora, tēnā koutou, atamarie. It's morning in Australia still. Am I sharing my screen yet?
Not yet.
Not at the moment.
Yep, there we go.
Perfect. Okay, so yes, thank you. My name is Tanya. I'm the Great Barrier Reef Community Campaigner for the Australian Marine Conservation Society. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land and sea countries of Aotearoa, Australia and New Zealand, who cared for our oceans before the arrival of European settlers. Today I'm calling in from the home of the Gimoe, Walubara, Yidinji, Irukandji and Jabukai people in Gimoe, also known as Cairns, far north Queensland. On behalf of the AMCS, I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that this land and sea was and always will be Aboriginal land and sea. So about the AMCS, it's a bit of a mouthful, the Australian Marine Conservation Society, but it pretty much sums up what we do. It's Australia's only environmental charity focused solely on protecting our oceans. It's one of Australia's oldest environmental charities, more than 55 years old. And from small beginnings, we now have more than 200,000 supporters and 48 staff spread all across Australia, working on a number of different campaigns. Some of them are listed here. So for example, our plastics campaign is achieving a lot of success with getting the different states to phase out single-use plastics like straws and plastic bags. We have a shark campaign. We have a campaign to protect Ningaloo Reef, which is lesser known than the Great Barrier Reef, but is equally incredible, and that is on the west coast of Australia. We're part of the Fair Catch Alliance. We have a sustainable seafood guide, which encourages Australians to choose wisely when they're eating seafood. We have a marine parks campaign, and the one that I work for is the Fight for Our Reef campaign. We're entirely funded by our supporters and do not receive any government funding. And together with our supporters, we've achieved a lot, from leading the movement to ban whaling, stopping super trawlers from operating in Australian waters, and much, much more. But today I'm here to talk to you about the marine ecosystem that I work on, probably the most famous one, the Great Barrier Reef. So what's so great about it? It's the biggest reef in the world. You can see it from satellite images from outer space. It's more than 2,300 kilometers long, roughly covers the same area as the whole of Italy, for example, made up of a chain of more than 3,000 reefs. And together they form the overall Great Barrier Reef. Many islands, more than 1,500 species of fish, more than 650 types of corals, and of course, many endangered animals that we are helping to protect their habitat so they can survive. So the AMCS was started in 1967 by a group of mates who were marine scientists in Queensland, when the Australian government was handing out leases for limestone mining and oil drilling on the Great Barrier Reef. So pretty incredible to think that they were thinking of doing that on the Great Barrier Reef. But through extensive campaigning across Australia, the AMCS generated enough publicity and public pressure that the mining and drilling plans were scrapped. And in 1975, the reef was declared a marine park. After much more passionate advocacy by the AMCS, the reef was listed as a World Heritage Area by the United Nations in 1981, which is a huge win because it obligates the Australian government to do everything in its power to protect the reef. Even after being heritage listed, up until 2004, incredibly, only a measly 4% of the Great Barrier Reef was actually protected as a green zone, which means fishing was still allowed in 96% of the reef, as shown on the left. In 2004, the AMCS helped increase green zones from 4% to 33%, which is shown on the right, and that's how it remains today. So unfortunately, the challenges for the reef were far from over. In 2013, the Fight for Our Reef campaign was born. At the time, there was an $80 billion coal expansion plan with several industrial port proposals stretching across the Queensland coast in pristine areas which are home to endangered species like dugong and snubfin dolphins. There was also a plan to dump millions of tonnes of capital dredge spoil in the Great Barrier Reef World Heritage Area, which is depicted in the picture at the top left. So by working with the communities in Cairns and Ellie Beach to protect against these developments, AMCS was successful in stopping the coal port expansions and the capital dredge spoil dumping, which were huge wins for the reef. But we barely had time to celebrate these wins before in 2016, the Great Barrier Reef shot into the international spotlight. Some of you might remember why. As has been discussed by the speakers before me, our oceans are warming up steadily, and that warming has increased its rate of warming has increased, particularly over the past couple of decades. So the world's oceans are now heating up at the same rate as if 5 Hiroshima atomic bombs were dropped into the water every second. So do you guys know what happens to coral when water temperatures get too hot? Coral bleaching. So I'm sure you can imagine how I felt when I first got into the water for a dive and saw this happening at the reef. And that's when I knew I had to get involved with the AMCS and get involved in helping. So prior to 1998, there were no mass bleaching events of this scale. Just coral bleaching can happen for a variety of reasons on a natural scale, but since 1998, we've had 7 mass bleachings, 4 of which were in the last decade. So this is obviously not a natural cycle. It's a result of ocean warming, which is becoming more severe and frequent. Now, I want to reiterate that it's not too late to save our reef. So I included some beautiful pictures that I have taken recently at the reef to show that it is still teeming with an abundance of life, and it's absolutely resilient and beautiful and huge. So different areas are still regenerating, and tourism is doing a really good job of still taking people to the parts of the reef which are still in really good condition. However, to give our reef a chance for the future, we must keep warming below 1.5 degrees. If we reach 2 degrees of warming, we'll lose 99% of coral reefs. That is around the entire world, not just the Great Barrier Reef. If we can limit warming to 1.5 degrees, we will still probably lose 70% of coral reefs in the world, but we'll have 30% left to regenerate after that. So in order to keep global warming to 1.5 degrees, we only have a narrow window of time within the next decade to phase out fossil fuels and transition to renewable energy and reach net zero emissions. So everyone can do something in their own country to contribute it to this. So here in Queensland, the Fight for Our Reef campaign has worked extensively on trying to stop a large number of coal mines, which were proposed for our state here in Queensland. So the AMCS was part of the Stop Adani Alliance, which in November 2017 succeeded in stopping $1 billion of our public taxes going towards funding the Adani Carmichael coal mine. The Queensland Premier vetoed a planned loan of public money to the mine after more than 70,000 people participated in a year of nationwide protest. I'm in a couple of those pictures, probably 3 of them. Over the last 4 years, divestment pressure has also meant bank after bank has pulled out of deals to fund the Adani mine. Now 28 financial institutions have ruled out investing in Adani, including Westpac, CommBank, and 4 of the world's biggest banks. Although the Adani coal mine is unfortunately still being built, it has been delayed by years and is struggling financially. Our efforts so far have significantly reduced the amount of coal that has been dug up and burned. Tourism at the Great Barrier Reef. Ecotourism is highly regulated to meet strict eco standards and is not considered a threat to the reef, but rather is an important ally in helping to educate people and raise awareness about threats to the reef. We've trained up a number of people from the tourism industry, which is how I started. I started in the tourism industry and then got trained up by the AMCS to act as advocates for climate action by speaking about it on our tours, in the media, at protests and on social media, as well as signing a declaration urging the Australian government to enact stronger climate policies for the future of the reef. Here are some wins. So recently, just last month in February, it was very exciting. We had a huge win. Clive Palmer had a proposed coal mine which was going to be located just 10 kilometres from the Great Barrier Reef. So not only would it contribute to global warming, but it would also potentially have a direct pollution impact. We were campaigning on this for years with protests, letter writing, media, raising awareness in the media, petitions. And just last month, the Environment Minister decided to veto that mine, thanks to thousands of submissions that were sent in by AMCS members. We've been campaigning for a long time, as you can see in the top left, for the government to allow no new coal and gas and to fund renewables instead. And this has been successful, with the Queensland government pledging to end reliance on coal-fired power by 2035 and committing $2 billion towards publicly owned renewable energy. We've also been working on water quality. So second to climate change, declining water quality from pollutants like sediment, fertilizer and pesticides constitutes the second biggest threat to the Great Barrier Reef. This image in the top left shows floodwaters reaching the Great Barrier Reef during February 2019. Pollution carried from land by those floodwaters affects the health of coral, seagrass and marine life. The AMCS played a crucial role in getting the Queensland government to enact stricter water quality regulations in 2019, and we've defended them from being repealed since then. These regulations require land users, such as sugarcane, cattle and banana farmers, to put measures in place to reduce their chemical runoff into the waterways. We're also working on fisheries. So in November 2015, we helped to secure net-free zones in the Great Barrier Reef to protect dugongs, turtles and other endangered animals from becoming bycatch in commercial fishing nets. Unfortunately, overfishing, trawling and gillnet fishing are still threatening marine life in many areas of the reef, and this is something we're continuing to fight. In 2020, we also celebrated an end to a loophole that allowed sharks to be finned on the reef. Unfortunately, endangered sharks are still being fished on the Great Barrier Reef waters and sold as flake, which is something we are working to educate people about. Now, we are come to the current day, to our current campaign, the World Heritage Campaign. So the United Nations is in charge of World Heritage listed sites around the world. UN delegates visited the Great Barrier Reef on a monitoring mission last year, and in November they released a report recommending that the Great Barrier Reef be added to the World Heritage in Danger list, which means it is at risk of being delisted as a heritage site if urgent remedial actions are not taken. Now, it's not likely that things will get to that extreme, but the mission report set out 22 actions that the Australian government must take to rectify the situation. For the sake of simplicity for our campaign, we've summarised the 22 recommendations into 4 key actions our governments must take if they are serious about saving the reef. I'm talking about the Australian and Queensland governments. So that's on the right of the screen, 4 critical actions to protect our reef. The UN urges Australia to implement climate policies to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, to improve water quality, repair degraded gullies and restore wetlands, which will reduce pollution running into the reef. 3, end tree clearing and protect native vegetation, which will also stop pollution from running into the reef. And 4, stop gillnet fishing and monitor trawling catches to protect threatened species. So obviously the AMCS has already been working on these things and pushing our government to make changes like this, but the government are still lagging behind in enacting them. Now, with the United Nations backing us up and putting international pressure on the Australian government, this will probably be the best chance we've ever had to finally make the government to commit fully to these recommendations. So, as you may recall from a previous slide, the threat of an in danger listing by UNESCO was instrumental in getting the dredge spoil dumping banned in 2015. And the reef's heritage listing status will next be discussed by the UN at their World Heritage Committee meeting in September, which will be a pivotal time for us to draw attention to this issue in the media. Just got a couple more slides left, guys. So what we're working on now is our World Heritage campaign relating to that previous slide. So we're having a rally in Cairns on the 9th of May. We have a petition. I'll try to remember to share the link in the chat so you can sign it if you like. It is open to non-Australians. Anyone in the world can sign to protect our reef. We're coordinating an open letter declaration from the tourism industry to the government. We're going to be supporting community members to write letters and speak to their MPs. We're going to be assisting key spokespeople to raise awareness in the media and on social media. We're going to be holding stalls and events to raise awareness in the community. And this is the last slide, guys. So what you can do, I already kind of talked about, have got a petition going. You can sign up to our mailing list for campaign updates and find out more ways to help out. Follow us on social media, like and share our material. You can chip in to support our work or hold fundraisers for us. You can volunteer if you're in Australia or in a climate action group in your local area. Help us spread the word and get in touch with me for any further information. There's my email address. Noreira kati kone taku koredo, kanuinga mihi kia koutou, kia ora tātou katoa. Thank you for listening, everyone.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tanya. Hopefully those 4 critical actions are met and that we do see some actionable change happen for the Great Barrier Reef. But thank you for the work that you're doing and giving a voice to the Great Barrier Reef, which obviously can't speak for itself. So thank you. I just wanted to say a big thank you to our 3 guest speakers. If you've got any follow-up questions for them, feel free to ask in the chat now, and if they've got time, they'll respond. If not, flick us an email and we can get you guys in touch. If you'd like to share any of the work that you guys are doing in this space, in a similar forum, let us know, and we'll be happy to discuss that with you guys. We'll just finish up now by wrapping up on how you can get involved with the Butterfly Fish Foundation moving forward.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jack. So I just tried to share my screen, but it seems to not be willing to cooperate with me, but that's fine. We've only got a few minutes to go and my points are very brief. So how can you get involved? Well, the first thing you can do is sign up to our mailing list for updates. So on our website, www.butterflyfishfoundation.com, and our email address is hello@butterflyfishfoundation.com as well. Keep an eye on our website for updates for any other events like this. As we sort of described at the beginning of this webinar, we will be hosting other spaces and public events too. If you have a project that needs support or you want to start a project or have an idea for one, please reach out directly. Part of what we aim to do is coordinate connections. So we're looking to sort of make, as I described at the beginning, that we bring oceans work to leverage non-oceans organisations together so that we can progress some of these projects and get some action going. And also you can become actively involved as an official supporter or volunteer some time. So at the moment, we are not a charity. We are just a project, essentially. We will consider becoming a charity in due course, but at the moment, we are looking to either have organisations or people support us in whichever way works best for both. So you can essentially reach out on anything is probably the most simple thing to remember. So just as a recap, on Butterfly Fish Foundation, look, we are 2 people that work in a professional services organisation. What we're trying to do is really connect people and organisations in order to raise awareness for oceans and to mobilise collaborative and coordinated action for greater impact. Thank you to our speakers, Julie, Tanya and Finn, for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing updates from you and also hopefully having you in our community as we go forward as well. Thanks everyone for joining, for listening in. There will be a recording of this uploaded to our website once I figure out how, so that you can listen or have a look at the details for finding out more from our 3 respective speakers as well. And with that, I am a fan, if you've ever worked with me, I'm a fan of finishing an online call or meeting earlier so that we can have a couple minutes off our sleeve to run to our next session. So yeah, thanks everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday and look forward to hopefully seeing you on another one of these sessions again soon.
Thank you, everyone.